This is again a chapter from my upcoming autobiography. I hope you enjoy this. My attraction to Buddy Holly's music and career started at a pretty young age. It developed over time, picking up steam over many years. I would not place him in my top 30 all-time favorites as a teenager or young adult. However, by my 30s, he had swelled to be a figure I would put real focus. Most everyone knows the major hits and that he died in a plane crash. The crash itself would become an interest to me. I'm not sure why. It could be the parallel of my being a touring artist-musician, as was he. The picture in my mind of finishing a performance, climbing into a machine, and having it all end in a dark, cold night. That haunted me to some extent. My first North American touring would be at age 18, riding in a van that pulled a trailer with 3 other players. There were many nights that I rode into the black of nights with the sound of amplifiers still ringing in my ears. It could be a lonely experience. The love of music, though, would dictate that I do it. I was fortunate to not have it all end on the highway or a frozen field, as of now. In 1959, Holly was not so fortunate, nor were Ritchie Valens, Big Bopper, or pilot Roger Peterson. Singer-songwriter Don McLean captured a bit of the history in the opening lines of his large hit song, American Pie. One of the characters in his song was his widowed bride. Holly had only recently become a husband when the ill-fated flight took place. This widow from the McLean song would cross my path. By that time, I would have performed American Pie far too many times in sports bars, clubs, and fraternity parties. Also, I would have toured and recorded excessively with a particular guitar that was acquired as a result of my interest in Holly. By the way, there are some fascinating things about the McLean hit that seem to not be widely known. In the chorus, there is mention of whiskey, rye, a levee, a Chevy, and more. It turns out that it is the town of Rye, New York that is the reference, as in drinking whiskey in rye, not and rye. The levee is an actual bar by that name. It is Levy with a capital L. Knowing these things will bring more understanding to that chorus. It was the early 2000s, and the Stacey Earle and Mark-Stuart duo was on tour in full force. We were asked to be a feature act in Lubbock, Texas during Buddy Holly Week. The money offer was attractive, and we were flown in for a one-off concert. Our tour schedule had us in an entirely different part of the USA. However, we would jet into West Texas, then back out to pick up on the tour. To celebrate the favorite son, Lubbock would have a week of opening the Buddy Holly Museum free to public. On the last evening, there would be a little concert in a small amphitheater. That is where we would perform. With limited time to spare, we were picked up at the airport and driven to a sound check. Our hotel check-in would have to wait until later in the evening. In the airport, where Stacy's brother was the head official, stands a bronze statue of the great rock and roll artist. Ask yourself, if you are to climb on a plane, do you wish to see a figure of Buddy Holly just before? Anyway, off to the venue we went. The show went smoothly, and afterward many of the townspeople were sitting in a courtyard outside the museum. They stayed around until late that night. I was there hanging around. The museum was open and free to enter. I kept walking inside to look at the items on display. Jerry Allison's drum kit from the Crickets. Holly's early draft song lyrics, in his handwriting, were there to see. However, in a glass case was a Gibson J200 acoustic guitar. It was made in 1956 and used on many recordings. I had seen pictures of Buddy playing it. The first time I saw a J200 was in the hands of George Harrison in pictures from the Let It Be film. A large body guitar, a jumbo, this specific Gibson was well known amongst many musicians. The Nashville Skyline album cover of Bob Dylan showed him holding one. In fact, he gave it to Harrison in late 1968, and the Beatle brought it straight to the Let It Be sessions and film. It was later that I would see Holly with his, although those shots were from the late 1950s. I fixated on owning one, and that came to pass in early 1992. Mine has been on tour for years and used on countless recordings. I would sit outside the museum for minutes, then decide the items inside were too much of a lure. I would get up and go back inside for 15 to 20 minutes. After being outside with the crowd again, I would go inside for 15 to 20 minutes. This cycle kept happening. I was always alone in the museum and could not believe the good fortune of having it all to myself. As it got late at night, the lights were dimmed, giving it a special vibe. I guess that the townspeople had seen it all before and were no longer interested. Upon my final experience of looking around, I decided to revisit a good long eyeful of that Gibson J200. It was while doing that one last time that I saw a reflection in the glass case, a face right behind me. I turned around and saw a smiling person. The widow. Yes, that widow. I never knew Maria Elena Hawley was present all during our evening. I noticed you repeatedly looking at that guitar, she said to me. I told her I have one just like it, even with the same sunburst finish. Only mine was made in 1990, not 1956. At this point, the widow began recounting stories of Buddy writing songs on that guitar, and lots of things about her talking him into relocating to New York City, Greenwich Village. She told me of how she introduced him to the jazz and folk clubs in the village. This all led to a split between Buddy and his band, the Crickets. I knew that. However, now I was being told firsthand about intimate personal events in the lives of Maria Elena and Buddy from the widow herself. It seemed like everyone bolted at once. What seemed like a sudden, I was standing next to Stacy, luggage, bags, and guitar cases without a ride to the hotel. It was Lubbock, late at night, and it felt like the town had shut out the lights. The promoter, staff, and folks from our earlier concert and courtyard experience were all gone. We had no car, cell phones were new and we had none, and there was no payphone around. We began talking about the dire straits we found ourselves and how to get out of our dilemma. Should we step out onto the desolate street and hope to flag down a police car? It looked bleak for us. Then out of nowhere, a large car sped into the gravel parking lot of the museum. It startled us a bit, then a window came down. A familiar face leaned out and said, "Do you need a lift?" It was the widow. Shocked at how she came from nowhere, we said, "Yes, we do," and climbed in her back seat. All our guitars and luggage were piled on top of us. Maria Elena Hawley drove us to our hotel in Lubbock, Texas, and rescued us from a minor nightmare. I can't remember if I cried when we were saved by the widowed bride.